Colonel Douglas MacGregor, retired U.S. Army colonel, author and defense and foreign policy expert, consultant, joins us now. Greetings from the land of your ancestors, Colonel, where once men were men and women were women, and thanks to the Supreme Court decision today, it's back again. Men are men, women are women. That's not what I want to talk to you about, but you're welcome to weigh in. It's good to see you again. I wonder if, as a friend, supporter, one-time advisor to the Trump camp, you are dismayed by the number of wars that the peace candidate Donald Trump is now either in or looking like he might be about to get in.
George, it's good to see you as well. And first, let me congratulate the British court on figuring out truth for a change. Hopefully somebody in the United States is paying attention so that we can get out of this crazy business of arguing that men and women are artificial constructs when in fact they're very real. You're right, George. I am disappointed because I do know President Trump, and my disappointment is twofold. First of all, his choice of people to surround himself with leaves much to be desired. These people are not knowledgeable about the international system. I'm not sure they understand much about the economic system either at this point. But most important, it's not enough to want peace. You have to make it happen. Peace does not keep itself. I don't think President Trump has figured that out yet. And the notion that he could wave a wand and have an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine was never a logical step. And as you pointed out in your comments, the first thing he had to do was announce, look, I didn't want this war. I didn't start it. I don't want it to go on. So I am immediately halting all further military aid to Ukraine. And I'm withdrawing all U.S. personnel, people in and out of uniform, out of Ukraine within the next 48 hours. Had he done that, the world would probably be his oyster, because I think we know that President Putin is not interested in continuing this war, contrary to the propaganda, which is very thick in your part of the world, but also to some extent in Washington here. He has no appetite for a war of conquest in Eastern Europe.
But it is beginning to look like, just as before, that some in his own camp are sabotaging his intentions. I mean, if I were taking a stab at it, I'd say that General Kellogg and little Marco Rubio are not as interested in bringing about an end to the war in Ukraine as Donald Trump and Elon Musk might be. What would you say to that?
Listen, I think you're spot on. Trump's instincts are pretty good on these things, but he has a bad habit of not following his instincts and listening too much to people. I also think he's trapped by people who say, well, Mr. President, we need a win. You have to have a win. You can't go along with something. It has to bear your imprint. In other words, you have to be the author of peace. Instead of telling him, Mr. President, you're right. We have no long-term strategic interest in Ukraine except stability and peace. We have no interest in what happens, especially in Eastern Ukraine. So let's host a conference and help people solve this. That's not what he's being told. He's being told, whatever happens, you are the indispensable superpower. Well, that's a lot of nonsense. We aren't. We should have figured it out by now. I think we're learning that economically as you and I sit here.
Now, there's two other theaters I'd like to talk to you about, and I could pick either one as the second most important, but let me go to the Gulf. As it happens, I know the Arab and Muslim world very well. I don't know the Persians as much as I know the Arabs, but I definitely know them better than some of the people who appear to be advising President Trump. Having killed Iran's national hero, the hammer of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, General Soleimani, in his first term, we now have the spectacle of Donald Trump, or worse, a woman press spokesperson threatening Iran on America's behalf all the while supposedly negotiating with them. I don't know if that is the art of the deal in Atlantic City, but it sure ain't the art of the deal in the East, Colonel.
Well, I think that President Trump mistakenly thinks that threats work. That may be based on his business experience. I have no idea. I don't think he understands the region he's dealing with, and I don't see much evidence that anybody in his inner circle does. The one good thing that we can say with absolute certainty is that Donald Trump doesn't want a war in the Middle East. That is quite clear. I don't think he understands, though, it's not enough to not want a war. You have to adopt measures to prevent it. And there are various ways to do that. Instead of threatening the Iranians, I think he should seriously consider calling Mr. Netanyahu and say, if you do not cease and desist, I'm going to withdraw all support from you. In other words, stop killing people in Gaza, stop trying to expand the Israeli state into Syria and Lebanon, or potentially into the Sinai. It needs to end now. He's not going to do that because the people that paid for his election want war. So he has to figure out a way to avoid war and at the same time satisfy people who've seen the only solution on the horizon that they will adopt. And that's Libya, as you've heard. The Libyan solution, as enunciated by Mr. Netanyahu, is the one that his supporters in the United States want. Now, that leaves no room for maneuver, no room for negotiation, no diplomacy, nothing. So I don't know what Mr. Witkoff can achieve under those circumstances. But President Trump, at the end of the day, is going to have to make a decision. I was saying recently to somebody, the Kaiser in 1914 was the last man in Europe who wanted a war. Both the British and the French ambassadors in Berlin said that on the day that the Germans declared war. Everybody knew it, but he had to stop it. He wanted it to stop, but it's not enough to stand there and say, I don't want this to happen. I think that's the problem in the Middle East right now, because you and I know that this war, if it breaks out between us and Iran, will not be contained. It's going to spread. Others will come in. I don't see anything good coming out of this for either Israel or the United States.
Every road leads back to Israel, Colonel. It is the decades in which, and it's actually not as many decades as many people think. So in your lifetime and mine, it was once different. The Suez Crisis in 1956 was brought to an end by an American president who told Israel and Britain and France to cease and desist. It is a comparatively modern phenomenon that American presidents are bound to give Israel everything it asks for and bend America's interests to suit the interests of 7 million people, thousands of miles away on the Mediterranean.
No, I think it is. But on the other hand, it was pretty obvious that this was coming because the supporters of Israel in the United States control enormous quantities of money. They control most of the financial sector, the banking sector. They control clearly the media. And under those circumstances and the enormous quantity of money that they can pour into political campaigns, they cannot be ignored. So I think President Trump is, as I said earlier, he's in a very tough position. The other thing is that there are a lot of people that simply don't know what's been happening, as you point out, for 70 years. For large numbers of Americans, Iran has been evil incarnate for 50 years, 40 years. In other words, only one side of the story has ever been told. And the fact that the Iranians have bent over backwards, certainly since 2001, to try and end this condition of hostility between us, that never comes up for discussion. And no one is aware of it. Now, President Trump, I think, does know that there is an appetite in Iran for some sort of negotiated arrangement. And that's why he sent Witkoff there. And that's why, if you look at the demands he initially sent, the only one of real consequence to him is the nuclear weapon. And so now there's a focus on that. But that's not acceptable to the people that donated to his campaign. That's not acceptable to Israel. And it's not acceptable to the people that the Israel lobby controls on the Hill. So I cannot predict at this point whether or not President Trump can walk away with some sort of negotiated settlement and avoid a war. It's too soon to tell.
Well, let's turn to the big enchilada. It's not the most immediate likely cause of World War III, although it might ultimately be so, and that's the China front. I said in my monologue on Wednesday, insofar as President Trump is trying to return production, manufacturing, self-sufficiency into the United States economy, he has my full support. That's what I want for my own country of Britain. I don't want foreigners to own our land, our water, our railways, our public utilities, and I don't want us to be an ex-industrial power. So I say this with no animus in that regard, but he's not half making a mess of the way in which he's going about it. He's made America a laughingstock, a meme throughout the world on the China front, and he seems to be doubling down on it.
The same people who want him to go to war in the Middle East and continue to obstruct intelligent action in Ukraine are also telling him several things which are no longer true, George. And President Trump has repeated it. And that is that the United States is indispensable as a market for the whole world. There's nowhere else for other people to go. Everybody has to come to us. We are the center of the universe economically. George, that hasn't been true for at least 20 years, maybe longer. China, however, can probably make the claim that it today is the world's largest and most important market. Everybody wants to do business with China. So threatening China, trying to block China, isn't going to work very well. Second part of this is that we export two things that are very important, but they're not that important to China. One is energy, that's oil, natural gas, so forth. The other is agriculture. Agricultural products are what we export. And if we make it harder for them to get it from us, that's not a problem for China. The Chinese can get that from Russia. They can get things from Latin America, Africa, any number of places where they're all doing business happily. So it was a mistake to assume that based on those two things, the Chinese would have to come back to us with hat in hand. And then finally, the third thing that we export bombs, George. We export military equipment. We export ammunition. That's it. We don't export anything else. What does China export that we need? Well, you've seen that revealed. Electronics, microcircuitry, a lot of complex material that we can't live without. Rare earths. You know, we have rare earths in the United States. We have them in Canada. We've done nothing to develop them. We have not built a refinery for rare earths. If you want to refine your rare earths, you send your bag of stuff over to Kazakhstan or China or out of Mongolia. Why? Because no one has invested wisely in the United States in it. So he was unaware of those things. I think that President Trump labors under the misconception that we are militarily, politically, and economically what we were in 1991. We are. The world has changed. And that's something that is difficult for him to understand because everyone around him is telling him something else.